This is Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. In just a few days, on July 1st, Vermont will hit a significant milestone, one that will resonate nationally. 25 years ago, on July 1st, 2000, same-sex couples were able to join in civil union in Vermont. This first-of-its-kind legal recognition of same-sex relationships turned out to be a pivotal moment in the marriage equality movement. Same-sex marriage later became legal in Vermont in 2009. And civil unions are a big part of the reason why today we celebrate another major anniversary. Today we mark 10 years since Obergefell v. Hodges, the U.S. Supreme Court decision that legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. Civil unions came out of a 1999 Vermont Supreme Court decision in a case now known as Baker v. Vermont. Stan Baker and his partner, Peter Harrigan, were one of three couples who brought the case to the Vermont Supreme Court. On Monday of this week, Stan Baker died at the age of 79. Later in the hour, we will remember Stan together and open our phone lines. But first, Vermont Edition producer Andrea Laurion has been talking with LGBTQ plus Vermonters who were coming of age and coming out around the year 2000 when civil unions became legal. They were likely too young at the time to be thinking about marriage for themselves, but they were old enough to know what was going on and how it might affect them one day. Let's listen.
It's the first Saturday of Essex Pride at Maple Park, and the rain just won't quit. Another rainy Saturday in Vermont, who'd have thought? Despite the showers, spirits are still high inside the art market. And of course, because it's Vermont, I immediately see people I know.
How's it going so far? Good. Amy has sold a good amount of prints. We've been doing Sharpie tattoos, and those have been pretty popular and great for engagement.
Do you want to give me one?
Sure.
At the other end of the park, drag performer and host Katniss Everqueer is keeping the crowd engaged in the performance pavilion. You could even say people were having a gay old time.
Okay, I'm going to make a few quick announcements, reminders, and then we have our final act of the day. Not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 people coming to the stage.
Joyful pride events like these are pretty commonplace in Vermont. The state consistently ranks as one of the most LGBTQ plus friendly states in the country. Last year, Vermont was the only state without an anti-LGBTQ plus bill on its legislative docket. Vermont's place in history was cemented 25 years ago, when this little green state became the first to legally recognize same-sex relationships. The Vermont Supreme Court ruled in Baker v. Vermont that the state had to allow same-sex marriage, or a legal alternative. The landmark civil unions law that followed was the first step in the marriage equality that exists for LGBTQ plus couples today. Here's Governor Howard Dean at a press conference after signing the civil unions bill in April of 2000.
I choose to sign this bill because I fundamentally believe that it's the right thing to do. I also fundamentally believe that in the long run, this is the right thing to do for the state of Vermont and for the United States of America. I believe that because until every human being is treated with dignity, because they are a human being, and not because they belong in some category, then every American and every Vermonter is poorer because of that.
Compared to many other parts of the country, Vermont is a safe space for LGBTQ plus people. But reality is often a bit more complicated.
Rain, okay, you are my friend.
Mm-hmm.
You're one of the first people I met here.
I love that.
It was through my friendship with Rain and sharing our backgrounds that I first got an idea of what it was like to grow up as a queer kid in Vermont during the turn of the millennium. Rain went to elementary school in Middlebury, and then middle and high school in Montpelier.
When I was a teenager, almost no one in high school was out. It was the early and mid 2000s, so it was when the word gay was the pejorative du jour. Everything that you didn't like was gay. Conflicting, weird time to be a queer youth, I would say. Mm-hmm. Yeah, not the worst place, but not the best either.
Yeah. And I'd never heard of this before I met you, but you told me about Take Back Vermont.
Yeah. From my understanding, like Take Back Vermont was a reactionary, or it felt at the time like a reactionary response to civil unions and gay rights. I think there were certain population segments of the state that really felt things were getting too progressive too fast, and it made them, I think, mad and scared. And so around the time that civil unions got passed, these big black and white signs started popping up all over the state, like white backgrounds, big black block letters that just said, "Take Back Vermont." It was sad and it sucked.
Rain was in middle school when civil unions passed.
I just remember the Vermont State House in Montpelier was full of people, and they were having open testimony for people to give their opinions. All sorts of people were going up and giving their opinions for or against.
It concerns me that without traditional marriage intact, the children of our state will be victims of confusion and a lack of a strong standard.
The question is not only should they be allowed to marry, but are gay and lesbian Vermonters worthy of respect and acceptance?
For centuries, marriage between a man and a woman has been the glue that has held societies together.
As a woman living in a committed, loving relationship with another woman with whom I am raising her 2 sons, I live a secretive life out of fear.
And would ask that this body of lawmakers not bend to political pressure to legitimize this behavior by calling it marriage.
I have this one memory that I really loved. I grew up in a liberal religious tradition, and so I have this memory of being at the State House, and this young Unitarian Universalist minister got up to testify, and she said something along the lines basically of, "Hi, you folks have heard a lot of religious arguments against civil unions, and there is this perception that like the only way to be religious is to be anti-gay. I am a religious official, and I want to tell you about religious arguments for civil unions." Like, I still remember being in that room and looking down and hearing her talk, and how incredible of an experience it was to hear that minister talk in support of queer people, and then for it to work and for civil unions to be passed, and how much it felt like Vermont was doing the right thing.
Hearing Rain's story made me curious about the experiences of other young LGBTQ plus Vermonters during this time. What was it like to grow up and figure out your sexuality while your typically quiet state was in the national spotlight? And what if the topic of discussion relates to the very thing you're trying to understand about yourself?
All the people my age, I think, who are queer must have had a really interesting time with it. All the different layers of like what your family thinks, what your town thinks, what your country thinks, you know, the perception of what all the different layers of society might think of you, while trying to figure out in a way the balance of, is it safe? Is this important enough to me to risk getting hurt by coming out? And that is a really psychologically heavy burden, I think, for an adolescent to bear, to be in the long, hard figuring out process of who they are on the inside.
Where are those Vermonters now? How did that time affect them? I wanted to find out and hear some of their stories. Justin Marsh grew up in Cambridge.
Just a multi-generation Vermonter, farm family, lived on a road where it was my family, my aunt and uncle, and my grandparents, and the barn was in the middle, and a sugaring operation as well. So real rural roots.
They first came out as bi at age 15 to their friends, before coming out to their parents at 16.
And then I kind of stopped coming out. I just sort of lived my life authentically, and people put the pieces together from there.
You might also know Justin as the drag performer Emoji Nightmare. Emoji performs all over Vermont, hosting bingos and brunches. Emoji Nightmare also reads children's books as part of Drag Story Hour. Here's Emoji sharing makeup skills at their alma mater, VTSU Johnson, in April of this year.
I wanted to start. We did a makeup tutorial where I basically packed everything that I did my face with and brought it with me, and I put it on Alex. So step by step.
But long before that, Justin was a kid in Lamoille County, a 10-year-old at the time that civil unions were being debated in Montpelier.
It's complicated, right? And as a kid, you don't fully have the picture of what the political landscape is like. And especially then in Vermont, where we didn't have, I didn't have internet until I was in college. So or maybe even after that. So I couldn't just fire up the computer and do this research on my own. I actually learned the term gay from Marcellus Parsons on WCAX News. I have a memory that's burned into my mind. The news was on and they were talking about gay marriage and civil unions, and I didn't know what constituted a gay marriage. So I asked my parents, and I don't necessarily remember their exact words, but I just remember that it was not seen as, like, my perception of what gay was not a good thing necessarily.
In high school, Justin rocked eyeliner, loved pop music, and cruised around the university mall with a group of older girls from church. But despite being a performer now, teenage Justin wouldn't even help with the stage crew.
I didn't want anything to do with performing arts in high school because that was just a target really for anyone to either tell me that you're gay or it's just one more thing to give someone. So I avoided that like the plague and just sort of kept a low profile.
Many queer people find they need to leave where they're from to find community, and you found community and still were able to maintain that.
It was never a consideration for me to leave Vermont, I guess. And people were surprised by it.
In fact, Justin's first exploration of drag and gender identity didn't happen in Burlington, but in their hometown of Cambridge. After working at Smuggler's Notch, Justin would go out with some friends to a nearby dive bar.
I'd throw on some outfits, some makeup, and do my hair real weird. And yeah, I remember my mom being like, what are you doing that here? Do that in Burlington.
Justin celebrated 10 years of Emoji Nightmare this past spring. I asked what they would say to teenage Justin now.
What I would tell myself then is you're going to do a lot of things that you don't think you're ever going to do. I embraced so many parts of my identity. I've embraced so many parts of my artistic abilities that they'll find their potential partner there. They'll, they're going to feel embraced. They're going to feel love and connection. Those things may not be important to you right now at 15 or 16, but they're going to really feel important to you then.
Justin found community and support in their hometown, but not everyone does. Lots of LGBTQ plus people choose to leave where they're from, often searching for acceptance elsewhere. One of those Vermonters who moved away is Jesse Proya. Jesse is an LGBTQ plus specialized psychotherapist and queer writer living in Denver, Colorado. He's from St. Johnsbury and described his younger self as a Northeast Kingdom kid.
I knew I was different from a very young age, so I kind of always had a chip on my shoulder and kind of moved through adolescence that way.
What does a Northeast Kingdom kid mean?
Well, it's funny because I often say we're ag kids, agricultural kids, but we're also agro kids. We take a lot of pride in being from the most rural part of the state, and we have a lot of pride of being of the Northeast Kingdom.
Growing up, Jesse spent a lot of time painting, drawing, and taking pictures around the NEK. As a young teen becoming aware of his queerness, Jesse recalled that period around civil unions as a very traumatic time.
Being aware of what Take Back Vermont meant, and then seeing those billboards all over the state was really, even just talking about it now, I get emotional. It was everyone in the Northeast Kingdom and everyone across the state was saying, not you, we don't like you, you're not welcome here. And it's wild to think that they're saying take Vermont back, and I'm a multi-generational Vermonter, and that the issue of queerness was just completely erased within something that could be pre-existing within the state.
Jesse's love of art would eventually take him to Brooklyn and London. He found healing and community with artists and comes back to visit Vermont often. Jesse finds comfort in the smaller pride events taking place across the state.
I wish that level of visibility was available when I was that age. And I remember last summer, Newport Pride, that was represented with so many queer farmers and queer agricultural folks. I thought it was so gorgeous to see that and to see it not fitting into, again, that perfect frame of what pride should be like or what queerness should be like, and have it be community reflective. And to me, that's Vermont.
This June alone, there were at least 15 different Pride events, from Essex to Newport to Bennington to Rutland. That's in addition to Pride events that were held in other months, such as Heartland Pride in May, or the large Burlington Pride in September. There's also year-round events such as queer country line dancing, or queer birding hikes, or queer karaoke, also known as queerioke. Vermont Queer Craft organizes twice-yearly events in Barrie, where queer artists and crafters can sell their work. The events include activities that don't require money to bring the community together. One of those organizers, Dana Dwinell Yardley, also grew up in the NEK. As a kid, Dana was homeschooled on a 45-acre homestead in Irisburg.
Think tie-dye t-shirts and t-shirts that say peace and t-shirts that have a million holes in them from the running around in the woods.
Thanks to homeschooling, Dana said she was insulated from some of the political backlash that was happening in the Northeast Kingdom at the time. She grew up with a lot of queer people in her life, and her parents were openly bisexual.
Being queer was always an option in my family, which is just such a gift. They're like, however you end up being, whoever you end up liking, it's going to be great. We're going to love you. It was this very open-ended way of being in my family.
Dana's mom was a Unitarian Universalist minister, and their church was involved in interfaith days of action at the State House around civil unions.
We had a bunch of queer couples in our church, and this was a big deal, like a really big personal deal for people. So our church did a bunch of organizing around this and made the trek down to Montpelier, and it is a trek from the kingdom. It's like an hour and a half.
Dana spent a lot of time at the State House that winter, a great civics lesson for a homeschooler.
I was getting a crash course in how does branches of government work? How does decision-making work on a political scale? Understanding the difference between the Supreme Court and then the legislature, and then the governor was going to have to sign it. I fell in love with the architecture of the building and also just the process that was going on in there, and that we got to be part of that. We could just walk into the State House. Like, how cool was that?
Looking back now, Dana said participating in getting civil unions passed was her first piece of political organizing, a big part of her life today.
Largely one of the reasons that bill got passed is that people came out because people are afraid of things they don't know. And so there was this huge movement to be like, hello, I am your neighbor. I am also gay. I don't know if you knew that, but you know me. You helped me pull my car out of the ditch. We garden together, whatever it is. I think the fear is just so much based on what we don't know and on queer folks being invisible and not being part of the narrative and not being part of what people see publicly.
The civil unions law went into effect on July 1st, 2000. Dana got to tag along as her mom performed civil union ceremonies at their church in Derby Line. The church had received hate mail for its activism work, but ultimately, the ceremonies that first weekend in July went on just fine. 13-year-old Dana couldn't believe there were members of the press sitting in the balcony of her church.
There was international press from Canada sitting there and like, this is just my church. This is my little dinky church with 35 members that I go to Sunday school at. When you're 13, everything is changing and everything feels a little momentous when you have all the hormones that are like, this is momentous, but this thing was truly momentous. So yeah, just getting to be alive in that time, at that particular time in my life was a cool confluence.
The State House also played a big role for Vermont's treasurer, Mike Pichek.
In 1998, I was a page up in Montpelier in the legislature.
Every session, 8th grade students from all around Vermont apply to be a legislative page. Pages deliver messages, assist the sergeant-at-arms, and get a front row seat to legislative action in the Vermont House and Senate. They do it all while wearing a signature green blazer. The civil unions case wasn't a legislative item that session, but it was a topic of conversation.
I just remember feeling like that issue was very on the surface and people were talking about it and thinking about it, civil unions, that is, and marriage equality.
Describe teenage Mike for me. Put teenage Mike in that chair right over there. What's he wearing? What's he look like? What's he into?
All right. Well, teenage Mike probably the only difference, I'd have a buzz cut. Yeah. Yeah. That was a common hairstyle for me.
Were you a punk? Is that why you had the shaved head?
No, I played football actually.
The beginning of his teenage years were very different compared to the end.
13 or 14, I was pretty shy and pretty quiet, tried not to be the center of anything. And by the time I became 18, sort of through the teenage years, I was much more outgoing and personable and more connections and friendships and things like that.
Treasurer Pichek, Mike, lives in Winooski now, but grew up in Brattleboro. His transition from shy to outgoing started after attending a nearby boarding school in Massachusetts.
It was really transformative in many ways, and I was expecting it to be a good academic experience, but it ended up that it was much more about the personal growth.
Mike will never know what his high school experience would have been like if he had attended a different school, but he thinks going somewhere new was part of what got him out of his shell.
I do think it had something to do with being out of this place that I had grown up and loved and was comfortable and knew everybody. People knew how to pronounce my last name in Brattleboro. They didn't know how to pronounce my last name in this new school. That was always a marker for me of whether I was someplace that I considered home, and it forced me to grow up.
Mike's family is very active in the Brattleboro community, and from a young age, he wanted to be involved in public service too. Despite his shyness, Mike was president of his 6th, 7th, and 8th grade classes. Yet, Mike still had some questions about his future.
Wrestling with this idea that can you do public service and be gay? Can you do public service and be accepted? Can you be successful at it?
Young Mike saw possibility in former state representative Bill Lippert, the only openly gay elected state official at the time.
As a 13, 14-year-old me being in Montpelier and seeing this person who was very openly out and proud and gay and had no qualms about it and no reservations about it. He struck me as somebody that was much more dynamic and forceful than a lot of the other legislators that were there. And so it wasn't just that he was, the only openly gay legislator. It was that I thought he was so effective and such a eloquent speaker and so passionate and so thoughtful, and that left an impact on me.
Mike is not the only one who has been touched by Bill's words. On March 15, 2000, as the House debated the civil unions measure, Bill Lippert stood up and gave an impassioned speech. His speech is widely credited as a turning point in the debate over civil unions.
Passing the bill that the House Judiciary Committee has brought forward will not end discrimination. It will not end prejudice. It will not end hate. But it will grant rights. You may argue about whether they're civil rights or other rights. But I'll tell you this, they're rights that I don't have right now. And most everyone else in this chamber does.
Yes, I was nervous, but it was a privilege that I got to stand up and speak the truth about who we are as gay and lesbian people.
This is Bill Lippert. We spoke a few weeks ago.
Because during the time of civil unions, the prejudice, the vitriol, the hatefulness that was being brought forward by people who clearly did not know gay and lesbian people, I got the opportunity to say, no, let me put a face on this. Let me tell you what's true about who we are. And that was, for me, a blessing.
Bill grew up the son of a minister in rural Pennsylvania. In the summer of 1967, the summer of love, teenage Bill attended a national church conference in Berkeley, California, and it was eye-opening.
It was the first time I'd seen two men dancing together, and it stirred all my inner struggles massively. In 1967, I was 17 years old. And I was struggling. There's no pretense about it. And that's part of why I identify so strongly and have over my adult lifetime with young people, young LGBTQ queer youth.
What was harder for you? That time in your life as a teenager where you were struggling and you were trying to know yourself, or when you were the only out gay legislator in Vermont?
It was much harder to be thinking that I might be the only gay person anywhere in my world. There were different challenges being the only openly gay member of the Vermont legislature. But by that point in my life, I had the good fortune to have built a solid network of support. And so while there were all kinds of vicious attacks, it was much worse to be isolated as a teen with no visible role models.
After moving to Vermont, Bill worked in mental health, and he said he was painfully aware of the struggles of gay and lesbian teenagers. So, in 1989, Bill was part of the group that started Outright Vermont to support and empower LGBTQ+ youth across the state. The organization has really grown over the decades. Last year, Outright purchased more than 140 acres of lakefront property as a permanent home for their residential summer camp, Camp Outright. For several summers, Bill was a volunteer at Camp Outright, and 2 moments of connection with young people have stayed with him.
Well, you might not know by listening, but I'm 75. And when I was volunteering, I was probably in my late 60s, early 70s. Most of the staff at Camp Outright are in their 20s or 30s. So I stood out. And I can remember 2 different occasions which come to mind, thinking about what it means to be a role model. And as we were standing in the lunch line one day, this young person turned to me and they said, "Would you be my gay grandpa?"
Stop.
And I was touched.
Later on, Bill attended the camp talent show with his husband, Enrique.
During a break, we were standing talking to each other, and there was this young person nearby, and it was very clear they wanted to say hello. So I finally invited them in, and they basically said to us, "I just want to tell you how hopeful it is to see an old gay couple." Now, as soon as the words left their mouth, they were embarrassed. But we immediately laughed and said, "We are, in fact, an old gay couple." But what was so touching was that there was something hopeful for them, and that they wanted to articulate that and tell us that it mattered to them.
Bill, who longed for a role model, ended up becoming that for others.
We were able to offer something there that we had not received when we were the young teen boys, me in central Pennsylvania and my spouse who grew up in Guam.
And maybe someday, those young people will be that hope for someone else. Back at that soggy Saturday in Essex, the crowd at Essex Pride is having a good time, despite the showers.
Something that has come out of love, has come out of community, has literally come out of the neighborhoods of Essex Junction, from our doors.
As a kid, getting married can feel so far away. And only in the last decade did marriage become a right that people who aren't straight could even consider. It's hard to dream of wearing a white wedding dress when you'd rather put on a crisp suit, or vice versa. Young people at the turn of the millennium learned they could love whomever they wanted and make that love official in the eyes of the law. And that's thanks to Vermont, our brave little state.
Happy Pride Month! Let's start it. Let's live June ferociously, fiercely, weirdly, and queerly. Let's live year-round that way. We are here for you. We see you. We love you. Thank you, everyone!
That piece was by our producer, Andrea Laurion. We'll continue our special honoring the 25th anniversary of civil unions in just a minute here on Vermont Edition. Stay with us.
Thanks for listening to Vermont Edition, where support comes from Vital. Did you know that 98.9% of Vermonters share health data with their providers through the nonprofit Vital to support better care? Learn more at vitl.net/sharing.
Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Today, we are reflecting on the 25th anniversary of civil unions in Vermont. This legal alternative to marriage, the first of its kind in the United States, was the result of a Vermont Supreme Court case that came to be known as the Baker decision. The court ruled that the state had no legal basis to discriminate against same-sex couples. If the legislature wasn't going to grant marriage licenses to same-sex couples, it would have to figure out a legal alternative. Stan Baker was the lead plaintiff on that case. He and his partner, Peter Harrigan, were one of 3 couples involved. This week, Stan Baker died at the age of 79. To honor his life, let's hear a portion of a 2019 Vermont Edition conversation he had with Vermont Public's Jane Lindholm. He began by describing the experience of being in the State House, listening to testimony for and against marriage rights for gay couples.
I've often told people that sitting in the well of the House during those public hearings, which were amazingly well attended, even in blizzards, our job was to look dignified, to not overreact, and to listen. listening to a lot of people telling you how horrible you are can be taxing. And I told people almost jokingly that I learned to put up this plexiglass Leviticus shield so I didn't have to hear those quotes over and over and over again. And I'm a spiritual religious person, so I believe something entirely differently. But still, it can soak in. And yet it was an incredibly impressive process to see Vermonters from both sides showing up and expressing their views as deeply as they did.
Stan, what about for you and for your husband? What motivated you to get involved in this lawsuit?
I always like to remind people that the reason we got in the lawsuit is because we fell in love. And we wanted to have a way for our friends and our family to come together and celebrate that, but also to celebrate there was a legal connection between us. There are probably over 300 laws statewide and over 1,000 laws federally that pertain to marriage, and we wanted to have those protections.
Reflecting on Take Back Vermont, which, was a remarkable thing that started happening. And Take Back Vermont was sort of already out there, but really that movement became galvanized after the civil unions legislation. And I'd love to know, Stan, how you reflect on that. For people who are growing up today, they may not even remember what that felt like to see that in Vermont.
I think the Take Back Vermont movement was an extension of the people who so strongly felt that same-sex marriage was a evil thing or a bad thing or would somehow make the sky fall, which obviously it didn't. And I think those people still were feeling quite wounded after the civil unions bill passed. So they started this Take Back Vermont movement, and as several people have said, I think 6 or 7 legislators, Republican legislators, lost their seats. And these were brave people like Marion Milne of Central Vermont, who spoke beautifully about why she supported same-sex marriage and how she couldn't think about responding to her children and grandchildren if she didn't support it. Tom Little did not lose his seat, and he was co-chair of the Judiciary Committee. He's the only Republican that Peter and I have ever had a fundraiser for. John Edwards of Swanton lost his seat. These are real heroes. I think that there was, as you've said and others, there was a shift in the legislature in the House in that election right after civil union, and the majority was lost to the Democrats. Then they got it back. And one of the things that we have felt very strongly in the Freedom to Marry community was change is built on relationships. And we must all tell our stories to neighbors, to friends, to business associates, so that they know that they know somebody who is queer or gay or lesbian or bisexual, trans. I'd just like to say one more thing. We are in a similar time now in our country of really frayed nerves, of people finding it hard to talk to each other. And I would like to just recommend what we did in the Freedom to Marry movement, which was to tell our stories, meet our neighbors, and listen to their stories. And if there's mutual listening of stories, some of that tension goes away. So I didn't see that as a really bad thing back then. It was hard to see. But it was an important debate because people didn't have to pretend anymore. And I think if people can listen in the same way now, we might be able to move forward.
That was Stan Baker speaking on Vermont Edition in 2019. Susan Murray of Burlington was one of the attorneys who represented Stan and his partner in the lawsuit. Susan and I spoke by phone the other day about Stan.
Stan was the perfect client because he was such a great guy. He was attentive, he listened, and the part that I loved most about him was he was so articulate and so courageous in the face of some pretty awful things that were said about him and death threats that he received during the whole battle back in the civil unions day. But he never said anything bad about the people he was receiving that those threats from. I think that kind of faith in humanity carried him through.
How did you first get to working on this case? Do you remember why it was something that you felt passionate about standing up for in your capacity as a lawyer?
Having represented some same-sex couples, help people write wills and trusts and powers of attorney and guardianship papers and all sorts of things like that, and none of those things could come close to the automatic kinds of rights that a couple would receive automatically upon getting married. So it was not enough.
Yeah.
And I saw that, and I, like many young people, went to law school because I wanted to fight injustice, and this was a case that I saw, and it was important to me to try to right what seemed to me to be an egregious wrong.
As you were working on it, did you have a sense back then that it was going to become the history-making case that it now so clearly is?
It's a good thing I didn't, because I'm not sure I would have taken it on. It was a lot of work. It was a lot. We were trying to do our paid work at the same time we were taking this case on a pro bono basis, and it took up virtually every second of my waking life for many years. But I was lucky to work at a firm that fully supported me.
Does it feel like 25 years has passed?
Back when we started, there was overwhelming opposition to the concept of two people of the same sex being able to get married. And now, 70% or so of the United States population thinks it's just fine. You have young people who have been born since the civil union battle took place and since marriage equality became a reality, and they don't know any other reality. And I think that the law sends a message about what's valuable and what's important, and civil unions law and then the marriage law sent those messages, certainly to people in Vermont and I think around the country.
That was Susan Murray of Burlington. She's an attorney who was part of the Vermont Supreme Court case that led to the nation's first civil union law. A number of you have shared your memories of that time when the debate over civil unions was heated and often ugly. Former State Senator Dick McCormick of Windsor County was in the legislature at that time. He wrote us an email and said he remembers when the Senate Judiciary Committee was divided on a couple proposed amendments that were intended to compromise with opponents on the right, but were likely to lose enough votes on the left to kill the bill entirely. Several senators went to a public forum in St. Albans. Dick McCormick writes, the anti-civil unions crowd there provided a display of hate, rage, threat, and incivility. Senator Ann Cummings decided the opposition was not really available for a compromise. The next day, she voted no, creating a tie and killing the amendments. The committee then voted to send the bill to the Senate, which passed it without the poison pill amendments. There was a moment when the entire issue turned on the ugliness of bigots at one meeting and the good human perception of one legislator. Everything that ever happened almost didn't. Perhaps you remember attending a public forum like that around the year 2000. Please call in and tell us about it. Our number is 800-639-2211. We do have to take one more quick break, but when we come back, we'll take your calls and we'll be joined by David Moats. His editorials in the Rutland Herald about civil unions won him a Pulitzer Prize. You're listening to Vermont Edition. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. The 25th anniversary of civil unions is on July 1st. This legal recognition of same-sex couples in Vermont proved to be a pivotal moment in the marriage equality movement. The actions of Vermont's legislators are part of the reason why today we celebrate another major anniversary. It's been 10 years to the day since Obergefell v. Hodges, the U.S. Supreme Court decision that legalized same-sex marriage across the United States. Now, before the show, we received an email from Jane in Washington, Vermont, with some thoughts on civil unions. Jane writes, it was a tricky time when all at once our guarded privacy necessarily changed into coming out. The community was mixed in its support and opposition. The same neighbor who had pulled us out of a snowbank later hosted a Take Back Vermont party, prominently displaying in the large black and white Take Back Vermont sign. At the same time, pastors put up rainbow banners stating, "We celebrate diversity here." There were many heroes. One of the clearest, most measured, and persuasive voices was David Moats of the Rutland Herald. David joins us now in the Vermont Edition studio. He won a Pulitzer Prize in 2001 for his series of editorials about civil unions. He's also the author of Civil Wars, A Battle for Gay Marriage. David, welcome to Vermont Edition.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
What is it like hearing our listener Jane's message, calling you a hero of the civil rights movement? Civil unions movement, excuse me.
Well, it's nice to hear. I, at the time, was an editorial writer at the Herald just doing my job, and it was an issue that I knew was huge. All through the 90s, any gay rights issue that came up was extremely volatile. There was a lot of strong feeling on each side. There was violence. There was a vicious beating of a guy outside a bar in Burlington at one point that in the early 90s that pushed a piece of legislation ahead. There was big hearings in Rutland in the mid-90s about a book that was in the library and people wanted it removed. It was called Heather Has Two Mommies or something like that. And people thought it wasn't appropriate, but people came out by the hundreds to debate this. It was by the time the gay marriage ruling came out, the Baker ruling came out, I knew it was going to be huge. And I knew I had to pay attention and follow it closely. So that's what I did.
Makes it sound simple, but this was obviously a very heated topic of debate in towns all across Vermont, including Rutland. When you started writing these editorials, did you start to, lose readers or advertisers? Did you have to fight to get these published?
No, I mean, I wrote the editorials and they ran them. The newspaper had public opinion to deal with, the advertising department, there was a lot of bitter feeling, but the news department just had to carry on, and I was protected from public pressure. The editors didn't tell me anything about what to do, and so I just had to follow the news and write editorials as I saw fit about what might help push the debate forward, what might bring a little clarity, and at each step of the way, over the course of 4 months, the process was there were all kinds of obstacles in the House Judiciary Committee, in the House, in the Senate. Each step of the way there was a battle, and there were people from outside the state, anti-gay activists coming in and creating a vicious feeling. And those public hearings that people were mentioning previously, hundreds of people descended on the State House on winter evenings to testify pro and con. Heartfelt testimony on both sides, and it made a huge impact on people. And so it was a consuming issue for the whole state. And I was just trying to see my way through and help people see through the whole issue.
So you won a Pulitzer Prize for your editorials in 2001. Civil unions had just become legal the year before, and the Take Back Vermont movement was still in full swing. What do you remember about the public's response to not just the news that you were being nationally recognized for these editorials, but that civil unions really were here to stay? I'm sure it was a tough time in some ways.
A lot of people in Vermont felt they'd really been through a war in pushing civil unions through, and there was still a lot of bitter feeling. And those who supported civil unions when were happy that it had become law, and then they hear that my editorials received national recognition, they felt kind of vindicated, as if the world out there said, no, this is good, this is okay. And I had a friend, not even that close of a friend, but someone I knew. She said she was driving her car somewhere up in the mountains, and she heard this on the news, and she burst into tears. Just at the fact that the sense of vindication that the world out there thought Vermont had done a good thing.
Yeah. Oh, we were earlier in the show remembering Stan Baker, one of the plaintiffs in the Vermont Supreme Court case that led to the creation of civil unions. Stan died earlier this week. Did you ever get to meet him or the other plaintiffs in the case?
I interviewed all 6 plaintiffs. I wrote my book a couple of years after the whole thing. The book came out in 2004. So I interviewed Susan Murray and Beth Robinson, the lawyers, and all the plaintiffs. And so I knew Stan and Peter and the other 4 plaintiffs. Stan, I was sad to hear this news this week. I didn't know that he had passed, and he was a super gentle person and super strong and articulate person, and so people need to know that. The other plaintiffs were also strong and brought their own gifts to the battle. In fact, the choice of plaintiffs was a key thing. They had to stand up to it. They had to be able to stand up to the fire and be firm in their convictions. And Stan was that kind of person among the six.
Gentle and strong. That's a special combination.
Yeah.
So when you were first chatting with our producer, Andrea Laurion, ahead of this show, you told her that you saw some comparisons to be made between Vermont at the time of the civil unions debate and the 1960s anti-war movement in California, which you also lived through. What are those similarities?
What I meant was that in the 60s, I was in college in the late 60s, and the whole society was sort of consumed by conflict in a large sense, the nation. But we felt it on the ground where we were in college in California. And it has the way the state was consumed by conflict over civil unions was as extreme as that, except more personal. And so that I could see somebody in the supermarket who I knew didn't like what I was writing. Someone I knew, kind of a friend, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to go down that aisle and encounter her. But people were having those kinds of encounters, and it was the whole community was dealing with diverse views on a complicated issue.
Well, our nation remains bitterly divided on a host of issues to this day. What do you think that we could take from this moment, the 25th anniversary of the civil unions, and this time in which we're looking back on that period of both divide and I don't know, great success and togetherness? What can we learn that could help us today?
Well, once civil unions passed, and then once marriage equality passed, and once marriage equality nationally passed, the sky didn't fall. People were able to marry the person they loved, and people got on with their lives. And if you remember that, there's always opposition. There's always people who have an issue and they want to exploit it. And especially now, people are exploiting these cultural issues and in extremely destructive ways. But remember that it really, gay marriage doesn't hurt anybody. People have different moral point of view of that. And I say, if you don't like gay marriage, don't marry a person of the same sex. It's your decision, and for someone else, it's their decision. So, yes, now there are people who want to overturn Obergefell, and that's ridiculous. So let's carry on. Bill Lippert one time told me he doesn't consider the Take Back Vermont movement at the time a backlash, because that somehow makes the activist feel like, oh, it's their fault because they did something and now there's a backlash. No, it's just the opposition. And the opposition is always going to be there, and you have to hold firm to your position. And right now the opposition is riding a little higher than in the past.
And as we heard from Stan Baker when he was on Vermont Edition in 2019, we all just have to keep talking.
Right, exactly.
It's important. David Moats won a Pulitzer Prize in 2001 for his series of editorials in the Rutland Herald about civil unions. He's also the author of Civil Wars, A Battle for Gay Marriage. David, it's been an honor talking with you today.
Thank you for having me here. I've enjoyed it.
That is all the time that we have for today's Vermont Edition. As always, you can weigh in on our show, pitch us ideas, tell us your thoughts about this hour by emailing vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. Our show today was directed by Mary Angish. John Ahrens is our managing producer. Andrea Laurion and Daniela Fierro are our producers. Our intern is Callie Knuxerl, who is also our call screener today. Our theme music is by Myra Flynn. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch up again soon.